The first indication that something was catastrophically wrong came through a faint distress signal, barely a whisper across the electromagnetic static that blankets the North Atlantic at night. It arrived at 2:14 a.m. Greenwich Mean Time, intercepted by a Portuguese maritime monitoring station that had been otherwise silent for hours. The message was incomplete, fragmented, and impossibly old-fashioned. A short-wave burst, pulsing with erratic Morse-like intervals, as if sent from equipment decades out of date. It contained no coordinates, no ship identification, no structured SOS formatting, just a looping string of garbled beeps, followed by a low, guttural scraping sound that the operator replayed twice before calling for his supervisor. Most modern vessels hadn't used this form of communication for nearly half a century. Even pirate trawlers and unregistered carriers had upgraded, but this signal? It sounded like something dredged up from another era. The supervisor frowned at the spectrum analysis, leaning in closer as the scraping noise played again through the speakers, like metal dragging across metal or a chain being pulled along a rusted deck. "What ship uses equipment like this?" the operator muttered. His supervisor didn't answer. He just stared at the audiograph and felt a cold ripple move across his skin. The signal pulsed again, more distorted this time. They checked the international database. No matching vessel signatures, no outdated ship registries alive in that region. Nothing at all. But the location could be roughly triangulated. An area of international waters, nearly 300 nautical miles west of the Azores, an empty stretch of the Atlantic where commercial charts noted little except deep trenches, old wrecks, and unpredictable currents. A place no one had any reason to be. A place where ships disappeared and stayed disappeared. Within the hour, the Portuguese Navy issued a quiet alert to regional maritime forces, noting an unknown distress transmission in an unregulated zone. They expected routine follow-up, perhaps a malfunctioning buoy, a drifting piece of military scrap, a fisherman who'd been too cheap to upgrade his radio. But then came the second signal. This time, the transmission lasted nearly 20 seconds, long enough for analysts to confirm that it came from a moving vessel. The signature was bizarre. Strong emission, low technical sophistication, as if someone had mounted a powerful amplifier to an antique transmitter. But what made the situation shift from strange to alarming was the voice. Near the end of the transmission, under the distortion and static, someone whispered something. A word, or a name, or a plea. Analysts enhanced the audio. They slowed it. They isolated frequencies. They tried everything they could to clean it. And still the words sounded the same. Help. Not screamed, not gasped. Just spoken, quietly, deliberately, with the thin quivering tone of someone who had long passed the edge of fear and slipped into a hollow kind of resignation. By sunrise, attention from Portugal had turned into a coordinated multinational inquiry. The United States, Spain, and the UK each sent analysts. The distress signal had reached their channels too, ricocheting across military frequencies. And then, a satellite sweep caught something. A shadow. Faint. Blurry. Barely the outline of a ship drifting in a slow, lazy arc across the waves. But the strangest part wasn't that the ship had no registered transponder, no AIS beacon, no radio identifier or navigational lights. It was that the same satellite had scanned this region 3 weeks earlier, and the shape had been there too, drifting in the same arc, unmoving, unchanging, as if caught in a loop. The U.S. Coast Guard was the first to propose sending a team. They had the nearest cutter with international operational clearance, but before deployment, a legal complication appeared. Because the vessel's origin was unknown, its flag was unknown. And if its flag was unknown, its jurisdiction was unknown. And if its jurisdiction was unknown, the ship legally belonged to no one. A ghost ship. The first officers to look into the ship's possible identity combed old maritime archives. Many vessels had gone missing in the Atlantic over the past century. The ocean was a graveyard full of iron bones and untold stories. But none of those missing ships matched the rough dimensions extrapolated from satellite imagery. In the meantime, the distress signal continued. Weak, intermittent, always from the same location, and always accompanied by the same scraping metallic noise and the whisper, "Help." By noon, the North Atlantic was blanketed by a dull gray overcast that hung low to the water. Swells rose gently, rolling like the slow breathing of an ancient beast. The cutter, USCG Meridian, reached the region first. Her captain, Commander Rachel Waller, peered through the salt-spotted binoculars as they entered the coordinates. She expected an abandoned trawler, or drug-running junk, or perhaps a wreck bobbing against the current. Her crew saw nothing but open ocean. The instruments showed nothing, too. No radar reflection, no thermal signature, no movement. Yet the signal kept coming. Then a low fog rolled across the water, not drifting toward them, but rising from the sea as if exhaled by something beneath. The air temperature dropped by nearly 10 degrees. The radio crackled, not with interference, but with something like a heartbeat. Long pulse, short pulse, long pulse, short pulse. 1 o'clock, 20 degrees starboard, a lookout suddenly shouted. Waller swung her binoculars, and then she saw the ship, appearing not as if approaching from the horizon, but as if emerging from the fog like a memory solidifying into matter. A hulking shape, dark steel hull, weathered plating streaked with orange rust. The structure was massive, easily the size of a mid-century cargo carrier, but its silhouette was wrong, angular, outdated, nearly archaic. Its masts were bent, its railings were jagged, its cranes were frozen in place like skeletal arms reaching up toward the sky. No flag, no marking, no visible crew. Just a derelict Titan drifting toward them with unnatural slowness. "Good Lord," one officer whispered. The Meridian drew closer until the ghost ship's immense hull loomed over them like a silent cliff face. Her first officer read from the detection console. No radio ID, no AIS, no thermal readings on Beck. He frowned deeper. No engine activity, no electrical signatures at all. The ship was dead. Completely dead. Yet someone or something had sent distress calls from it. They circled the vessel. Windows were shattered, bulkheads dented, rusted lifeboat davits dangling without boats. The nameplate on the bow was corroded to near illegibility. Waller squinted. Letters emerged through the flaking paint. STELLAMARI. She whispered the name. Stella Maris. Her blood chilled. The Stella Maris was a legend among maritime old-timers, a cargo vessel rumored to have vanished in 1977 under classified circumstances while transporting experimental equipment from Europe to the U.S. government. Government files had been sealed for decades. Some said it carried military technology. Others claimed biological samples. Others insisted it had gone rogue before disappearing entirely. And now, it was here, drifting, cold, silent. But the worst part, the part that made Waller's skin crawl, was the fact that the ship looked exactly as it had in archival photos. Unchanged, untouched by 40 years of storms, salt, and decay, except for rust that seemed somehow wrong, as though painted on rather than earned by time.
And then the radio screamed. A shrill burst of distorted sound tore through the communications room, echoing across the cutter. Every officer instinctively covered their ears. The signal lasted only seconds before cutting off entirely. When it cleared, a single phrase remained, whispered through static. "You shouldn't be here." A young officer's voice shook. "Commander, that voice? I think it came from on board the Stella Maris." Commander Waller stared at the ghost ship, its silent hull towering above the waves. She felt watched, not by the wind, not by the sea, but by the ship itself. And she whispered something she did not intend for anyone to hear. "What are you?" The rain had thinned into a mist by the time the Estrellas lowered its small tactical craft into the water. The crew, handpicked for their ability to stay calm in situations where political consequences could outweigh bullets, moved with stiff, deliberate discipline. Their boots clanked softly against the metal as they descended, one by one, each carrying a flashlight, basic weapons, and a mandate they barely understood. International waters were not lawless, exactly, but they were a place where laws blurred, faded, stretched and snapped depending on who was watching. Tonight, no one was watching. Or so they hoped. The small craft skimmed across the dark surface, slicing through the reflection of the moon. The abandoned cargo ship loomed larger with every second, its bulk towering like a monolith, a black shape blotting out the horizon. Captain Elena Ward stood at the front of the vessel, rain dripping down the brim of her cap, her jaw set in a hard line. She had led boarding missions before, piracy responses off Somalia, migrant rescues in the Mediterranean, even high-pressure standoffs in disputed zones. But nothing about this felt familiar. Nothing about this felt right. "Radio check," she said, voice steady. "Comms clear," her second-in-command replied. "Thermal?" No heat signatures. None. At all. That bothered her more than the silence from the ship. Cargo ships were full of life, even when empty. Engines cooling, electronics humming, generators beating their rhythmic pulse. Ships were machines that breathed. But this one was still. Too still. When they reached the hull, the boarding hooks clanged against metal. The echo rang out across the water like a warning. The team ascended quickly, their shadows rippling across the rusted side. Ward reached the rail and hoisted herself up, landing silently. Her boots hit the deck with a dull thud. Then, nothing. The deck stretched out in a wide, open plain of steel, slick with rain. No crates, no scattered tools, no signs of movement, no lights. It was as though the ship had been frozen in time. The boarding crew formed a circle around her, weapons low but ready. "Spread out," Ward ordered quietly. "Slow and careful. Check for signs of life." The sound of footsteps was swallowed by the vastness. Rain pattered in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. A gull cried somewhere in the distance, followed by the groaning of shifting metal as the ship settled against the swell. The air smelled of rust and stale salt. One of her officers, Petty Officer Malik, approached the main stairwell leading below deck. He hesitated before shining his flashlight down the dark shaft. The beam revealed a long metal staircase. No movement. "Captain, there's something wrong," he said softly. "There's a lot wrong," she murmured. Malik nodded, but this, he pointed the flashlight at the rail. The metal was bent outward, as if something had pulled itself up in a violent struggle. Not inward, like someone grabbing for leverage. Outward, almost ripped. She inspected it. Edges torn, jagged. An animal couldn't do that. A person couldn't do that, not with tools, and even then it would have left marks. These tears looked organic, as if the metal had been peeled open like paper. "Move," she said quietly. "Keep eyes sharp." They made their way to the bridge first. It was protocol. Learn the status, the logs, the story the ship wanted to tell. The bridge door was locked but rusted, weakened from the weather. With a shoulder shove, it gave way. Inside, the bridge was dark except for the blinking of a dead console attempting to reboot. The screens flickered with dying light, showing static, distorted lines, then nothing. Ward swept her flashlight across the room. The chairs were still pushed in. Maps lay unfolded on the table, weighted by navigation tools. Someone had been working here. Recently. But then the beam landed on something that made her breath pause. Near the window, smeared across the glass, was a long streak of what looked like dried, dark fluid. It was almost black in the low lighting. A thin trail ran downward, as if a hand, or something like a hand, had dragged itself across it. "Blood?" Malik whispered. Ward leaned closer. The texture was wrong. It was thicker, more tar-like, with a faint chemical sheen. Not quite blood. Not quite something else. "Bag a sample," she ordered. One of the science officers did so, hands trembling. They searched the consoles. The navigation log was blank. The GPS was off. Radio logs were wiped clean. The ship's name, the Elysian Gale, still glimmered on the console screen. But beneath it, a blinking error message repeated, "Crew vital monitoring, offline. Engine function, offline. Security system, active. Warning, unauthorized presence." The team exchanged uneasy looks. "The security system is still online," Malik said. "But the power's cut." "Yes," she said. "Which means something on this ship is running independently from the main grid." The question was obvious. What? Before they could investigate, a loud metallic slam echoed from below deck. Everyone froze. The slam repeated, rhythmic, steady, like a heartbeat against steel. Something was moving down there, something heavy. "Forward," she said softly. She forced calmness into her voice. The crew descended into the lower passageways. The interior corridors were cramped, claustrophobic, lined with peeling paint and rusted pipes. Their flashlights carved thin paths through the darkness, revealing nothing but the long, stretching hallway ahead. The sound grew louder with each step. Clang, clang, clang. "What is that?" someone whispered. "Not machinery," she said. "Not too irregular, too organic." They reached the cargo hold door. A thick fog drifted from the edges, like cold vapor escaping from a sealed chamber. Ward pressed her hand against the metal. It was freezing, unnaturally so, as if the room beyond had been chilled far below sea temperature. She looked at Malik. "Open it." He hesitated, then spun the wheel lock. The hatch groaned. As it opened, fog billowed out like breath escaping a corpse. Their flashlights cut through the mist, and what they saw inside brought the entire team to a halt. The cargo hold was empty. Completely empty. No containers, no crates, no ropes, no signs of cargo at all. Just a vast open space of steel. But on the floor, etched deeply into the plates, were long gouges, scratches that curved, intersected, spiraled, as if something massive had dragged itself across the metal. The grooves were too deep to be made by any ordinary tool. Some were nearly an inch deep. And at the far end of the hold, illuminated by the faint moonlight slipping through the ship's ventilation grates, stood a container. Just one. A single steel container, padlocked shut, its doors slightly bent outward as though something inside had pushed against them with immense force. Ward approached it slowly, her pulse thundering in her ears. Malik whispered, "Captain, should we Open it? Before she could answer, the ship itself groaned, a deep, resonant moan that vibrated through the deck. It sounded not typical of hull stress. It almost sounded like resentment. Ward took a step back. "Not yet," she said. "First we secured the..." Then something inside the container hit the wall hard. The metal buckled outward, the padlock snapping free and clattering onto the floor. The entire team raised their weapons. The container door creaked open by an inch. Silence followed. Then darkness within shifted. Something moved. Something heavy that scraped its weight across the steel floor. Ward aimed her flashlight at the gap, but the beam flickered, sputtered, and died. Every flashlight died. Total darkness swallowed them. Then, in the blackness, came a sound that froze every breath in every throat. Not a growl, not a voice. A slow, dragging inhale, like something waking from a long, forced sleep. A sound that did not belong on any ship, in any ocean, under any jurisdiction on Earth. Captain Ward whispered the only command she could. "Fall back. Now." And the darkness moved. The scramble to escape the cargo hold was not coordinated. It was pure, primal survival wrapped in the discipline of trained officers. Boots slammed against metal as Captain Aleda Ward shouted commands that were swallowed instantly by the darkness erupting around them. The ship howled under their feet, a deep metallic bellow like a waking leviathan stretching its limbs after centuries of sleep. The team's breath turned to fog in the freezing air pouring from the open container behind them, and every instinct, every human instinct, screamed to run. But running in total blackness was its own nightmare. Helmets collided. Fingers clawed through empty air, searching for rails. Someone fell, hard, sliding across the metal plates. Another officer grabbed their vest, yanking them upright, just as something in the cargo hold scraped forward. Each movement a dragging, wet sound that didn't match any known animal, machine, or mechanism. It was slow but deliberate, a presence, a thing that did not rush, as if it already knew it had trapped its prey. The emergency lights flickered overhead, dim, sickly red strips that sputtered on just long enough to reveal a silhouette inside the container. A shape crouched far too low for something so massive. A spine, or something like one, arched upward before the lights died again, plunging them back into black. "Move!" Ward barked, grabbing Malik's arm and shoving him toward the open corridor. They barreled through the doorway, slamming it shut behind them. Malik spun the wheel lock while another officer secured the bottom latch, then the door buckled. A single, enormous impact bulged the steel outward. The entire team stumbled back. Malik's voice trembled. "Captain, what is that?" Ward didn't answer, because she didn't have one. She steadied her breathing, her heart punching against her ribs. "Weapons ready, safety off. No one fires unless absolutely necessary. We have no idea what the rounds will do in close quarters. Move to the bridge stairwell. Regroup." The corridor stretched before them, long and shadowed. The emergency lights here were dead, not broken, just off, as though something had chosen to cut the power. They advanced slowly, flashlights barely flickering back to life, but glowing weakly, as if whatever was on this ship drained their energy. Malik whispered, "Captain, it didn't chase us." Ward nodded slightly. She had realized that too. Whatever was behind that door hadn't charged after them. It hadn't tried to tear its way through again. It was waiting, and that was far, far worse. As they crossed into the mid-deck passageway, the rain outside intensified, pounding against the hull. The ship rocked slightly, and for the first time since boarding, Ward felt the ocean beneath her. A reminder that they were alone on the open sea. No jurisdiction, no backup, no guarantee they'd even be found if something went wrong. The corridor stank, cold metal, stagnant water, and something faintly organic, a sour chemical tang that clung to the air. The walls glistened as if coated in condensation. But when Ward ran her fingers across the metal, the moisture felt sticky. She wiped her hand on her sleeve. The lights flickered. Not on, but from ahead, something gave off a faint pulsing glow. Very dim, blue-white, almost bioluminescent. The pulse throbbed like a heartbeat. Malik pointed. Captain, that wasn't here before. No, it wasn't. Keep formation, Ward said quietly. We approached together. They inched forward until they reached the source. The glow was coming from inside a ventilation grate, one that had been ripped open, the metal twisted outward the same way the rail on the deck had been. Whatever had passed through this vent hadn't squeezed, it had forced its way through. Inside the shaft, along the metal walls, faint streaks of the same tar-like substance from the bridge glistened. But this time, it pulsed faintly, as though reacting to the team's presence. Ward felt the air shift. The temperature rose slightly. A faint hum reverberated through the corridor, a vibration that grew slowly, almost imperceptibly. Captain, one of the officers whispered, is this biological? Ward swallowed. I don't know. Malik shone his light deeper into the vent. The shaft stretched forward into darkness. Then something inside shifted. Not toward them, away. Like it was moving through the walls. Enough, Ward said. We need to get to the bridge, now. They hurried up the stairwell. As they climbed, Ward felt the faint tremors of the ship beneath her boots, not from the waves, from movement. Inside the walls. Above them, below them. Something was roaming. Something that did not rush, did not panic, did not fear. Something that explored. At the top of the stairs, they emerged onto the bridge deck. The door slid open, revealing the moonlit interior. The smear on the window was still there, dark and dried. The consoles were flickering on and off, struggling for power. Except one. The security monitor glowed bright, fully powered. Ward approached it slowly. Malik stood beside her. How is that getting power? Everything else is dead. Ward touched the console. It vibrated slightly, alive in a way no machine should be. The monitor displayed a grid of the ship's interior, divided into multiple camera feeds. Feed after feed showed only darkness or static. But then, one camera came into focus. Cargo hold. The container was open. The fog had thinned. The floor glistened with that same pulsing substance. And in the center of the frame, something moved. The team gathered around the screen. The shape was massive, not humanoid, not animal, not mechanical. It had height, but also contorted breadth, bending in ways joints weren't meant to. Parts of it stretched like tendons, other parts folded like thick muscular fins. Its surface glistened, wet, black, shimmering with that same bioluminescent pulse. The thing lifted its head, or what they could only assume was its head, revealing a smooth surface with no visible eyes. But it looked at the camera. Every person in the room felt it. The ship groaned again. And then the screen flickered. The image distorted, and the thing was gone. Malik whispered, "Where did it?" Another camera feed flickered on. Mid-deck corridor, the vent. Something slid past the lens. A shadow moving far faster than they expected. Ward's pulse hammered. We need to isolate it, trap it in a section, force it into one location until we can figure out what we're dealing with. Another camera blinked on. A crew cabin. A shape entered, paused at the doorway, then slowly slid out of frame. Then another feed. Stairwell. Ward watched the screen as the shape glided silently across the steps, almost graceful in its movement. Then, another feed. The bridge hallway. Malik gasped. "Captain, that's right outside." Ward spun toward the door. Silence. Then, a faint scrape. Metal against metal. Very slow, very deliberate. They backed away from the entrance, weapons raised. Ward whispered, "Hold. Do not fire unless..." The lights went out. Not flickered, not dimmed. Went out completely. Total darkness swallowed the bridge. Someone inhaled sharply. Then the scraping noise came again. Right outside, now louder, closer. A soft thump pressed against the other side of the door, denting it inward. Slowly, testing. Ward steadied her breath. Her voice was barely audible. "Stand steady." The door bulged inward again, slightly stronger this time. The team tightened formation. Another dent. Another. Slower this time. Almost curious. The scraping grew louder. Then, silence. Total silence. Ward didn't move. No one did.
Seconds stretched into a minute. 2, 3. Then the ship groaned a long, echoing shift of metal fettling. The lights flickered back to life. The door was dented inward in 3 perfect impressions, but the hallway outside was empty. And the camera feed that had shown the creature near the bridge hallway was now nothing but static. Malik exhaled shakily. It left? Ward stared at the door. The dents were oddly symmetrical, too precise to be random. "It's testing us," she whispered. She turned to the others. "We hold position here, we regroup, we plan, and we survive the night." But deep down, she knew the truth. Whatever was on the ship had not come from nature, not from any country's waters, not from anything that belonged to Earth. And it had been kept locked, sealed, and suppressed for a reason that was now loose, in international waters, in a jurisdiction where no one was responsible, where no nation would claim it, where no one would admit it existed, and where there was nowhere to run. The rain outside intensified once more, hammering the hull like a warning, as if the ocean itself was trying to drown the ship before something far worse got out. The bridge remained silent long after the dents in the metal door stopped seeming fresh. Captain Elena Ward stood perfectly still, as though motion might provoke the thing stalking the ship. Outside, the storm raged harder than before, the rain an unending wall of sound that wrapped the vessel in isolation. The ocean was no longer a backdrop. It was a prison of black water in every direction, swallowing any hope of escape. Ward stepped closer to the security console. It was still humming softly, the only device fully powered. That alone made her uneasy. Machines didn't choose when to live or die. Something else fed this one, something that wanted them to watch. The monitor scrolled. One camera feed flickered into view. Deck 7, lower maintenance corridor. A flashlight lay on the floor, its beam pointed upward toward the dripping pipes above. The light flickered erratically, pulsating in rhythm with the faint bioluminescence they had seen smeared inside the vent. Ward leaned forward. "Playback," she murmured, but the footage was already looping, replaying something that had happened minutes or seconds before they even reached the bridge. The screen showed a member of her team, Officer Rivera, walking cautiously down the maintenance corridor alone. Ward's breath caught. Rivera had been with them in the cargo hold. They had all escaped together. "When did he?" Malik whispered, but Ward held up a hand. On the screen, Rivera's movements were stiff, wrong, almost mechanical. He held his radio in one hand, but didn't speak into it. He walked until he stood directly beneath the leaking pipe where the flashlight now lay. He stared straight up into the darkness. The camera's audio was faint but captured a dripping. No, a clicking sound. Organic. Soft. Rhythmic. Rivera didn't move. Then, a shape slid behind him. Not crawling, not walking. Sliding, like liquid shadow twisting into form. It rose slowly behind him, blocking the faint emergency light. Rivera didn't turn. He didn't even react. The creature, whatever it was, towered over him, its surface glistening with that bioluminescent pulse. Malik stepped back from the monitor. "Captain, we need to—" "Quiet," Ward said sharply. On the screen, the creature's surface rippled. Something extended from its form, long, slender, like a tendril made of cartilage and ink. It reached toward the back of Rivera's neck. When Rivera finally reacted, he didn't scream. He spoke. Softly. A whisper barely picked up by the camera mic. "It sees everything." The tendril touched him, and the feed cut to black. The flashlight clattered onto the floor in the darkness. The loop ended. The video restarted, Rivera repeating those same steps again and again, like a puppet in a broken theater reel. Malik's breath trembled. "Captain, is he alive?" Ward swallowed. "I don't know." But she did know. No human whispered like that.
No human moved like that. Something had rewritten him. The storm rattled the metal frame of the ship, and for a moment, it felt as if the entire vessel exhaled, long and exhausted. Ward straightened. We need to locate the creature, and we need to locate Rivera, if he's still mobile. Lock down the lower decks first. Seal every stairwell we can. Malik nodded and approached the control panel, but as he reached for the lock controls, his hand froze midair. All the lights in the control room flickered. The rain outside abruptly softened, turning from a roar to a whisper. The ship tilted slightly, as if something massive shifted its weight inside. Ward felt it first, a low vibration coming from the hull. Not mechanical, not structural, a heartbeat. Not theirs, and not the ocean's. The creature's. Deep, slow, pulsing through steel. She whispered into the darkness, "It's moving." They checked the monitors again. Cargo hold, empty. Middeck, empty. Crew cabins, empty. Bridge hallway, empty. Upper deck, static. Lower engine hall, Ward inhaled sharply. There, in the lower engine hall, Rivera stood motionless, his back to the camera. He swayed slightly, like a marionette hanging from a string only he could feel. Behind him, shadows warped unnaturally. The creature lingered just beyond the light, too large to hide, yet somehow perfectly still, like a sculpture frozen at the edge of comprehension. Ward clenched her jaw. "We need to get him out of there." Malik stared at her. "Captain, with all due respect, that thing is between us and him." Ward didn't flinch. "If we leave him there, whatever that thing is will spread, and if it spreads, this ship will not be the last place it reaches." She pointed toward the stairwell. "We take the port side route. It's narrow. It forces the creature to come at us single direction, and we keep our backs covered. If we lose visual, we retreat immediately." The team nodded reluctantly. As they moved toward the stairwell, the ship creaked violently, first bending to the left, then to the right. Something enormous was redistributing its weight. Ward steadied herself on the rail. The heartbeat grew louder. Then, the lights went out. This time, not a flicker, not a surge, not a malfunction. A blackout. A blackout with intention. She whispered into the darkness, "Flashlights now." But when she pressed the button, her light didn't turn on. Neither did Malik's, nor any of the others. Something was draining the energy out of them. A metallic scrape echoed from below, traveling upward through the stairwell, followed by a soft clicking, then another, a chorus of distant organic clicks. Malik's voice broke the silence. "Captain, I think it's communicating." Ward steadied her breathing. "Stay close. Move slowly. No sudden noise." They descended into the dark stairwell. Each step creaked. The ship shifted as if adjusting to their movement. At the bottom of the stairs, Ward pressed her hand against the wall, feeling blindly for the emergency door. Her fingers touched something warm. Not metal, not wall. She froze. The thing retreated slowly, sliding past her hand, leaving behind a sticky residue that pulsed faintly. She pulled her hand back, breath caught in her throat. A dim glow appeared ahead, very faint, like the dying ember of a bioluminescent organism. The corridor slowly illuminated, revealing streaks of the black tar-like substance lining the walls, pulsing in patterns, almost like veins, like a circulatory system running through the ship. And at the far end of the corridor, Rivera stood facing them, motionless, silent, his eyes reflecting the dim glow like glass marbles. Ward raised her hand slowly. "Rivera, can you hear me?" He tilted his head at an unnatural angle, like a bird studying prey. His neck cracked softly. Then he spoke, not in his voice, not even in a human rhythm.
It heals you. Ward stiffened. Rivera, we're taking you back to the bridge. Step forward, slowly. He didn't move. Instead, he smiled. A slow, wrong smile that didn't belong on any human face. That's when Ward saw it. Behind Rivera, rising from the floor, emerging from the wall, or perhaps both, the creature. Its form was less defined now, shifting like a mass of sinew and muscle draped in tar, pulsing with blue-white veins. Parts of it shimmered, while others absorbed the light entirely, devouring the darkness. Malik whispered, "Captain, it's bigger." It was much bigger. The creature slid forward, towering over Rivera without touching him. Rivera spoke again, in that same broken cadence. "It knows your shape." Ward raised her weapon, even knowing it would do nothing. "Fall back, slowly. No sudden movement." But the creature moved first. It did not lunge. It extended a limb, a long tendril-like structure from its mass, not to strike, but to reach toward Ward, studying the air around her like a blind animal sensing warmth. Ward held her breath. The tendril stopped inches from her face, close enough for her to feel the cold radiating off it, close enough to smell the faint metallic scent of whatever fluid pulsed within it. Then, a sound shook the corridor, not from the creature, from the ocean. A loud, grinding surge as something enormous hit the hull from the outside. The entire ship lurched. Metal screamed. The creature recoiled slightly, tendrils retracting instinctively. Ward seized the moment. "Move," she shouted. The team turned and ran, blind, stumbling in the dark corridor as the storm roared from the outside. The creature shrieked, a sound that should not exist, half metallic, half biological, entirely alien. The corridor lights flickered on for the briefest second, long enough to show Rivera collapsing to the floor, the creature twisting in a violent contortion, long enough to let Ward see the black tar spreading across the walls like wildfire, long enough to reveal the ship was sinking. Water surged up through the floor grates, ice cold and rising fast. Malik grabbed Ward's arm. "Captain, we need to get topside, now." Ward looked back one last time. The creature was dissolving into the walls, its tendrils retracting, its form collapsing into a moving pool of blackness spreading across the metal. Not dying, relocating, escaping into the ship itself. As the water rose and the hull groaned under the pressure of the storm, Ward made a decision she knew she would carry for the rest of her life. The creature was never meant to be transported. It was never meant to reach land. And if it did, there would be no stopping it. She turned and sprinted toward the upper deck as the ocean swallowed the lower corridors behind her. Now she knew the truth. The sea hadn't attacked them. The storm hadn't punished them. The ship hadn't malfunctioned. All of nature was trying to keep the creature from reaching shore. Because whatever it was, it did not belong in human waters, or any waters at all. The storm rolled in slowly, the sky bruising into a dark violet haze as thunder crawled across the distant clouds like something waking from a long sleep. Lieutenant Arjun Malik stood at the prow of the Orion, staring at the ghost ship drifting silently ahead of them. After days of pursuit, false radar echoes, vanishing coordinates, and inexplicable radio interference, the vessel was finally still, frozen, as though whatever force had been guiding it had suddenly lost interest or lost power. The crew moved quietly around Arjun, their boots thudding softly against the metal deck, their faces pale with anticipation. No one wanted to admit they were afraid, but everyone was. Sailors who'd spent 20 years on the water avoided looking at the ship directly. Men who weren't superstitious had started praying under their breath. And almost everyone had refused to sleep the night before because each time someone closed their eyes, they claimed they heard tapping on the hull. 3 knocks, perfectly spaced, as if someone or something was trying to be let in. Now, as the Orion approached, the ghost ship loomed taller, its rust-scar hull slick with seawater and streaked with dark stains that weren't rust at all. A lifeboat hung off one side, twisted metal suggesting it had been dropped or torn away. The ship bore no name, only faint letters sanded down long ago. A flagpole stood at its stern, but whatever flag once hung there had been shredded into threads that whipped wildly in the wind. Broadcast officer Lena tapped Arjun's shoulder. "We're not picking up any transponders, and there's still no heat signatures. So no one's on board." Though he knew better. Ships don't steer themselves. Not this precisely. Lena took a shaky breath. "Unless they don't show up on heat cams." Arjun didn't reply. The boarding team assembled near the starboard railing, 5 officers, each armed, each trying and failing to hide their nerves. Rain misted the air, speckling Arjun's hair, dripping down the back of his collar. The world felt heavy, quiet, wrong. As they climbed down into the motorized dinghy, the ocean surged gently around them as though guiding them toward the ghost ship. Every dip and rise of the waves pushed them closer until the hull towered above them like a rust-eaten fortress. The first officer, Ruiz, swallowed hard and pointed his flashlight upward. "There's a ladder here. Looks intact." Intact was generous. The ladder rattled against the hull like old bones, held in place by corroded bolts. Still, Ruiz climbed first, boots scraping metal, breath loud in the stillness. One by one, the others followed until Arjun brought up the rear. When he reached the railing and pulled himself onto the deck, the smell hit him first. Salt water, old diesel, and something faintly metallic, like dried blood on a knife that nobody bothered to clean. The deck was silent, completely silent. Even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. Ruiz lifted his radio. "Orion, this is Bravo team. We're on deck, beginning sweep." Static. A long, unnatural static, like the sound of wind screaming through a tunnel. Then, click. Someone or something cut the connection. Arjun exchanged a look with Lena. She touched her chest instinctively where her rosary would have been if she hadn't left it behind. The crew formed a tight formation, flashlights slicing through the fog drifting across the deck. Footsteps echoed, bouncing off metal walls, creating the illusion of movement behind them. They reached the doors to the lower decks. They were wide open, as if someone had been waiting or fleeing. Ruiz whispered, "Lights first, no quick moves." The corridor stretched into darkness, the floor littered with torn pages, bits of rope, shattered glass, and shoes. Single shoes. Scattered. No pairs. Lena crouched beside one, her flashlight lingering on it. "Children's size," she whispered. Arjun felt his stomach twist. "Keep moving." The team moved deeper. The walls were damp, streaked with something that dripped slowly, steadily, like the ship was bleeding. A humming noise began to rise beneath their feet, a low, thrumming vibration that felt more biological than mechanical. The deeper they walked, the warmer the air became. The ship was empty, yet breathing. They reached the crew quarters, beds overturned, lockers open, scratches on the walls, long, jagged, desperate. Some spelled words in languages they couldn't identify. Others were just frantic lines spiraling into nowhere. Ruiz found a journal on the floor, pages warped with moisture. The last entry was smudged, but legible enough. "We should never have approached the coordinates. I begged them to turn back. The sea isn't right here. It listens. It follows. It gets inside." The rest dissolved into ink and tears. Farther down the corridor, a door creaked open, on its own. Ruiz nearly jumped out of his skin. "You saw that, right?" Arjun nodded, gun drawn. Flashlight up. They stepped inside. The navigation room. Charts covered the walls, more than a dozen pinned up, all drawn over with strange curved patterns resembling tides, except tides don't form perfect circles. Some of the circles intersected, others spiraled inward towards a single point. A set of coordinates was circled repeatedly, carved into the wall, scratched into the desk, burned into the map. Once they checked the numbers, Lena froze. "These coordinates aren't on any maritime chart." She swallowed. "This point doesn't exist." Arjun stared at the map, then at the walls, then at the scratched numbers repeating like a ritual. What were they heading toward? Before anyone could answer, the ship groaned, long and low like a whale calling out from the depths. The deck beneath them vibrated violently, nearly throwing Lena to the ground. "The engine room," Arjun said. "Something's still running." But when they reached it, the engines were silent, untouched, dusty even. Not a single piece of machinery was warm. Yet, the ship moved earlier. Ruiz whispered, "How the hell did it travel without engines?" None of them wanted to say it, because the only explanation was impossible. Arjun turned slowly towards the rear bulkhead, where he saw something that wrenched the breath from his lungs. A door.
A heavy steel door that had been chained shut with industrial-grade restraints. Dozens of chains, some fresh, some rusted, some snapped like twigs. And on the door, scratched deep enough to dig through metal, "Do not open, no matter what you hear." A long silence stretched through the room. Then, bang, from behind the door. Once, twice, 3 times, perfectly spaced. Lena clasped her mouth, shaking. Ruiz took a step back. Another officer dropped his flashlight, breath shuddering uncontrollably. Arjun stared at the door, his pulse pounding. Something inside knocked again. Slow, calm, patient, like it didn't need to rush. Arjun whispered, "Back away, now." Ruiz hesitated. "But what if it's not human," Arjun said, chest tight. "Move." They backed out of the engine room, sealing the door behind them. The moment the latch clicked, the knocking stopped. Instantly, as though it acknowledged it couldn't leave. For now. By the time the team reached the deck again, the storm had fully arrived. Lightning tore across the sky. The Orion was visible through sheets of rain, its lights flickering. Lorena shouted into her radio, "Orion, respond!" Static. Then a voice. Faint, warped, wrong. Not from the Orion. Not from any human throat. Just one word. Stay. Arjun ripped the radio from her hand and threw it overboard. "We're leaving, now!" The team scrambled to the ladder, climbing frantically into the dinghy. Waves crashed hard, rocking the small boat dangerously as they sped toward the Orion. The ghost ship behind them groaned again, like something waking up slowly. Something hungry. When they reached the Orion, the crew pulled them aboard quickly. Arjun looked back at the ghost ship, its deck empty, its windows dark, its presence looming like a nightmare refusing to fade with daylight. And then the ship began to drift backwards, not with the current, against it.
gliding silently into the storm, swallowed by fog thicker than anything Arjun had ever seen. In seconds, it vanished, completely, as though it had never existed, as though it had only been visiting. Later in his official report, Arjun tried to make sense of everything, but the problem was simple. If he told the truth, no one would believe him. If he lied, he'd never sleep again. In the end, he submitted a report that said the ship was empty, abandoned, and lost to the storm. But he kept one detail to himself. Something only his team heard when they got back on the Orion. A final radio transmission. A whisper. Soft, familiar. Ruiz's voice. Except Ruiz had been standing right next to him when it came through. Opening the door now. The transmission timestamp 10 minutes after they'd left the ghost ship. 10 minutes after the door had stopped knocking. The ocean keeps many secrets. Some ships vanish forever. Others return when they shouldn't. But the worst ones, the ones sailors fear most, is the ships that drift silently across international waters with no crew, no origin, no engines, and no explanation, carrying something that should never reach shore. And somewhere out there in waters unclaimed by any nation, a door is knocking again. 3 times, perfectly spaced, waiting for someone curious enough or foolish enough to open it.